The featured game heading into this week was Michigan at Penn State. And the questions surrounding this game were bountiful, right? What would happen with Jim Harbaugh? Would he be coaching on the sidelines? Would Michigan be able to dominate Penn State on the road? Could Penn State muster some offense? And I think we got definitive answers to each and every one of those questions. Jim Harbaugh was not able to coach. The Big Ten did suspend him for the rest of the regular season, 3 games in totality. Michigan, of course, applied for a temporary restraining order. That was not granted. The hearing will be next week. And in all likelihood, Jim Harbaugh will miss the next 2 games as well. But for the other 2 questions, could Michigan win this game? They hadn't played anybody, was the narrative going around. They took care of business. And even though it was a low scoring game on the scoreboard, they dominated Penn State really from the word go. The Nittany Lions only mustered one true touchdown that meant anything today.
Yeah, and I mean, I really feel like I texted you guys this in our group text that we have going throughout the day. I feel like they lost that game on the first possession when they drove all the way down the field and had to settle for 3. That just felt so deflating. The offense was moving the ball. They had a really fun diamond formation that was working, the full house backfield with the pistol with the 2-back set next to Drew Aller. That was working. It was something that looked like Michigan wasn't very prepared for. And then Michigan's defense stands up tall, holds them to 3. And for the rest of the game, Michigan pretty much controlled and, asserted their will as they have all season long. Your notes here are correct, Mitch. Michigan didn't attempt a single pass in the entire second half. Like, that's just utter dominance when you can do that against an allegedly top 10 team. So Michigan is asserting their will. I think they fully deserve any credit they're going to get. I think they should move up in the college football playoff rankings this week. I know Ohio State had a good week beating up on a hapless Michigan State, but who's more dominant in this country than Michigan right now and has been all year?
Yeah, it's a great question to ask. I think Michigan is built to win a national championship this year. The defense is as solid as it's ever been, but most importantly, the offense is able to get points when they need to. And they've dominated lesser opponents, sure. Today you look at the scoreboard and go, okay, they scored 24. Like what's so great about that? As you mentioned, they didn't have to throw the football today. JJ McCarthy was very, very much in bus driver mode. And that's all that they needed to do against a Penn State team who boasts one of the best secondaries in the country. They also boast the second best rushing defense in the country. And Michigan certainly didn't overwhelm them, but Blake Corum did have a season high in rushing yards today, over 130 yards rushing, couple of scores. And, it was just another day at the office. It was a show up with your hard hat, your lunch pail kind of day for the Wolverines. And they're able to knock off a Penn State team that I was really hopeful for coming into the season. I made them one of my playoff picks. I went on a limb and said they'd win the Big Ten. And a couple of ingredients have been missing from this Penn State team that it held them back against Ohio State. It held them back against Michigan. And I want to run this by you because to me, Penn State's defense has all the ingredients, all the playmakers of a championship contender. But without a doubt, it's the offense that's holding them back. And I think they're held back because of 2 simple observations. Number one, Mike Yurcich is not creative at all. The play calling, the first drives for this season for Penn State have been abysmal. The play calling, the creativity, it's just lacked from Yurcich. And I think if you go over to Penn State Twitter, you'll see much of the same. That's not a hot take. But the second ingredient is that Drew Aller is not confident enough to command a winning football team right now. I'm not saying he won't be. I'm not saying that he's not talented enough. I'm not doubting his ability. But if you looked at Drew Aller today at home against Michigan, he was playing scared. He had deer in the headlights syndrome, and whether it was trying to step up and run or throwing down the field, he wasn't stepping into any of his passes. He was scared to get hit in that game. And in a ball game against a conference rival, when you're on the thinnest of margins, that prevents you from ultimately winning a football game.
I think you're leaving out the big elephant in the room, and that's James Franklin. 4-16 now, I believe, against Ohio State and Michigan.
Not good.
I highlighted it on the preview show this week that it was one of those wins too was in 2020 against Michigan when that was just a hapless Wolverines team that didn't really want to be out on the field. It looked like in the middle of the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, big game James is not living up to the hype in Penn State, and he, quite frankly, they're going to be third in the West or the East, excuse me, until something drastically changes here. I think they're one of the programs that's really excited that the division scheduling format is going away. They're going to get
Yeah.
out of having to play Michigan and Ohio State every year because it just isn't working for them. It's not, they can't get over that hump. We're too far into James Franklin's tenure to think that he's going to get over that hump eventually. And, I hate it for a guy like Drew Allard because we've seen flashes from him. I think he can be great eventually, but right now, you're right. Whether it's scheme or whether it's just confidence in him, he can't get it done on the field, and that's holding Penn State back.
Want to run another take by you. And I ran this by our friends over at the Transfer Portal CFB. We went back and forth in the group discussion over whether or not they thought this was a valid take. I think after explaining myself, I thought this did rattle out and even out to a valid take. Tell me I'm wrong for comparing James Franklin to Jimbo Fisher in that they're one in the same. Franklin just has the easier schedule. When I say that, in what ways do you see that being a true comparison?
I mean, Jimbo Fisher has a national championship on his resume. I don't think, unless I missed it, James Franklin doesn't have that as a head coach. But
In 2023. In 2023.
right, and I can't argue with that. Like you put James Franklin, excuse me, in the SEC West, and I know that he was at Vanderbilt for a while and did fairly well, especially by Vanderbilt standards in the East. But you put James Franklin in the SEC West from 2018 to 2023, I think you're seeing really similar results, if not worse results, from a Penn State team. I think the recruiting is a lower level. The game day execution seems similar. The offensive struggles very, very similar. I say that ironically on a night that Jimbo Fisher put up 51 points with a third string quarterback.
Yeah, he did.
I know it was against Mississippi State. Peep the handle down here, the Jalen Henderson Stan account. But listen, yeah, I think that's a valid comparison. There's a lot of hype behind James Franklin. He doesn't get the amount of national animosity that I feel like Jimbo Fisher does for some reason, but I think it's a fair comparison. It's a lot of talk. It's a lot of hype every single year and nothing to show for it at Penn State. Just beating up on a lot of really low-level programs. The Big Ten and the SEC, if we want to get into that debate, the Big Ten has so many more just quote-unquote easy wins than the SEC does. There's not an Ole Miss in the Big Ten, right? There's not a Tennessee. I guess you could argue that Penn State is maybe the Tennessee of the Big Ten, but there's not a Florida, right? There's not a LSU caliber program in the Big Ten behind Alabama and Georgia, where you'd say that's like the Ohio State and Michigan. There's just not. And, the Big Ten apologists will say that, they'll point to bowl records, or they'll point to this and that. Like, peep the NFL draft stats, first of all. The talent is way down south. Week in and week out, you got to prepare. And James Franklin just hasn't shown that he can get a team up for a big game. So I think it's an apt comparison. I think that I'd give the edge to Jimbo Fisher, and that should scare the snot out of Penn State fans.
Yikes. Okay. That was something I wasn't expecting.
I want Jimbo Fisher fired from my alma mater, and I would I would take him in a heartbeat over James Franklin right now. Like, if you're telling me A&M can have Jimbo Fisher or James Franklin next year, sign me up for year 7 of Jimbo Fisher.
Wow. Okay. I might need to put that out on our Twitter at 3TechPod. See if we can get some votes rolling in there. Who would you rather have for next year, James Franklin or Jimbo Fisher at your program? I think that's a fascinating thought experiment. So maybe next time I kick a topic to you, I'll put that out on our Twitter. If you're in our YouTube channel, if you're watching live with us, thank you so much for hanging out. Which coach would you rather have? James Franklin, Jimbo Fisher? Leave that in the comments for us. You can do so if you're watching the replay or over on the podcasting side as well. Like I said, right in at our social media page at 3TechPod on Instagram and Twitter. I think last thoughts here. I think that in the biggest area that I see those two as being comparable is just a failure to adjust in game. When the offense is lethargic, when the offense is lacking a spark, your quarterback is clearly not processing things according to how that game plan was set. There seems to be no plan B. It's ram your head into a wall until the clock hits triple zeros. And, you might get a pity touchdown at the end like Penn State did. But like I said, Aller was a deer in the headlights. And there just seemed to be no adjustment, nothing to get him comfortable. And not all of that is on coaching. Aller was terrible today, to be quite honest. He just was. That what was it, 4th and 6, 4th and 7 play, the play that essentially lost them the ball game. He threw the ball into a different zip code than the route that his wide receiver was running. And even the commentators, I think Joel Klatt tried to say, yeah, he was hoping his wide receiver kind of adjusted on a hot route in the moment, but like that was Aller knowing, hey, this isn't the route my wide receiver is running. I'm hoping with game on the line that he sees what I'm seeing and he's going to adjust. Like that's not going to win you ball games. And it bit Penn State. So, Aller was not good, but the lack of adjustment, just the same old from Yursich and Franklin was what got that comparison going in my head. And then I think it was one of our former colleagues at the transfer portal CFB, Jake Slauer, who actually made that comparison. I went, you know what? Let's take that and run with it.
Well, in case in point, that first drive, it was obviously scripted, as most first drives of games are, with, something that Michigan wasn't ready for. But then the second they face adversity, right? Like the second that they face the adversity and have to settle for the field goal, it's right back to the same old stuff. And, the lack of adjustments, the panicking in the game, going away from what was working, it's textbook James Franklin at this point. Like I said, we know what we're going to get. 10-2 season, great. You didn't show me anything. If you go 10-2 on Penn State's schedule, like maybe you beat a semi-good out-of-conference opponent. Okay, like West Virginia, awesome. Good for you. But 10-2 on Penn State's schedule is not impressive to me. And I think they're a living, walking argument against the expansion of the college football playoff, if I'm being quite honest. Because I don't want to see a 10-2 Penn State. If Penn State goes 10-2 this year and we hypothetically have a 12-team playoff, I don't want to see that team. Give me the 9-3 team that's coming on strong. I'd rather see Jaden Daniels and LSU than Penn State in a 12-team playoff this year.
Oh, that's certainly fair.
I'm coming hot tonight, man. It's week 11. Garrett's not here. I got to get the hot takes in and make up for Garrett's absence here.
You're making a friend with Danny Cannell with takes like that.
Gracious him! How about that?